Welcome again, everyone. My name is Carrie Anton. I'm the coordinator of accessibility services at Athabasca University. And I want to welcome Deanna Phillip, who is from My Learning Coach and a fantastic learning strategist who we've partnered with and referred lots of students to. And this is the fourth of 6 sessions. And I'm very excited to hear more about what we're going to be talking about today, test prep and performance. And with nothing more from me, I want to turn it over to Deanna to introduce herself and to get us rolling for today's series.
Perfect. Hi, everyone. Thanks, Carrie. Welcome back. Super excited to share some learning with you, some knowledge, some information, some resources, some strategies. Today, looks like everybody from the names I'm seeing, we've seen before, but those that don't know, I'm Deanna. I'm a learning specialist, strategist, learning coach, researcher, author. I have a whole bunch of hats. I'm really passionate about learning. I am really passionate about making learning accessible to everybody. I believe that learning is not a privilege, but a right, and that we need to make it accessible to all those who would like to learn. And so that's kind of I would argue, my life goal. My mission is to share the learning journey with others. And so session 4, we're going to look at some test prep and strategies and some performance stuff. We're not going to focus in the traditional sense that I think some of you might be experiencing or expecting. We really are going to focus on through more of kind of like a larger lens for our learning journey and practice, as opposed to here's a strategy, this is what it's good for, this is how it helps. So hopefully that people will find this lens really, really helpful. As with all the sessions, if you have any questions, I really, really encourage you to engage while we're in the session. Feel free to type something in the chat, raise your hand, however you need to reach out, please do. If you're not comfortable, I get that as well. I'm around afterwards, or you could definitely send me an email and I'll always respond. So I also will say the slides are a little bit different in terms of the order from what Carrie sent out earlier. I had a last minute, like, why am I presenting it that way? So I moved a couple things around just for a little bit of kind of clarity and organization in the conversation. So I'm hoping this will be more of a conversation. I know the online venue is a little bit different than if we were kind of sitting in the same room around a coffee table, but hopefully you feel comfortable asking some questions if needed. So we're going to talk about exam anxiety today, just a little bit. We're going to talk about some preterm prep. We're going to talk about something that I call the My Learning cycle. And then with that, some time management and some study strategies, all kind of intertwined together. So that's how we're going to focus today. So first thing I want to say is that exam anxiety is super common. I would argue that it's needed. I would say to a level, we need to have some sort of anxiety when we're in an exam situation. Anxiety keeps us going. It keeps us moving. It gets us to breathe. It gets us to interact to a point. When it becomes uncomfortable and when it's hindering our ability to perform the way we would like, or concentrate or focus, or even sometimes complete the assessment, that's when we need to talk about some supports and some strategies. So exam anxiety is separate from an anxiety disorder, and I really think it's important to make that difference. It is normal. It's okay for us to experience some anxiety. There's a reason why we're experiencing some anxiety. Maybe we're worrying about the exam, maybe we're worrying about the outcome, maybe we have some fears of being evaluated. Maybe we had some concerns earlier with our previous schooling where anxiety impacted us, or maybe we didn't have a good experience with the exam. Carrie, did you take control of my screen?
I didn't touch a thing. What happened?
Can everyone see the presentation? It told me that control was taken away.
Nope.
No one can see it.
Sorry, friend.
That's okay. I'm just going to re-share. I didn't touch anything and it left. Oh, okay. Let me see. Well, that's okay. No worries. Let me see if I can reshare. All good. Or can I? I no longer have the ability to share my screen. Hold on, friends. Carrie, are you able to see if I could regain the power here? Share. Here we go. I've got it.
Got it. Okay.
See if this pops up for everyone. Okay. Oh. Here we go. Okay, can everyone see the slide again? Okay.
Yes, we can.
Perfect.
Yes.
We're taking. All right, I'm going. Perfect. So in a nutshell, exam anxiety is common. There are ways that there's some strategies we can put in place to help us navigate exam anxiety. Now, before we can kind of put the strategies in, we have to kind of know what's causing it for us. And so, just like a brief overview, there's definitely, you could go hours and hours into this topic. So, there's a couple things that are like quite common in terms of causing the exam anxiety. It could be some lifestyle choices. So, perhaps lack of sleep and rest, some poor nutrition or lack of exercise. It could be some organizational or scheduling barriers. Maybe we're overscheduled. Maybe we haven't been able to plan our time well. We're feeling that kind of nervousness. It could also be related to information or a lack of information most often. So that could be not knowing what to expect, not knowing how to handle the anxiety that we're feeling about taking the exam, some underdeveloped test taking strategies. And so, some ways that we can kind of help support ourselves in feeling confident to complete the assessment and not feeling as much anxiety about it would be to prioritizing things like movement and exercise. And so I always say, take that big movement break and exercise break before you write that exam. Maybe it's in the morning before you go to write the exam. Maybe it's the night before you're going for a run or a bike ride or something to just get your body moving. If we've been sitting in one spot, just studying all the time, it can definitely feel a little stagnant. Making sure we have some balance. So it's really hard to have when you're really busy with work and school and family and just life in general, but creating a balance can really help us feel a little bit more prepared and a little bit more mindful in the moment. Um, just prioritizing a healthy lifestyle, and then also taking the initiative to locate accurate information that we're going to need to help us calm us. So if you're going into a situation where you don't know what to expect, or you don't know how to navigate the technology, or how to navigate your directions getting there, it's going to be a little bit more of an anxious situation for you when you're entering it. So there are some strategies that you can kind of put into place to help you navigate that anxiety, like situations that you're going to encounter that are not assessment related, going into a new environment that you haven't been before, or meeting somebody new that you haven't before. There's different ways that we can talk to ourselves and prep ourselves to be ready to do that. And we see this often with kids going to new schools, the transition from elementary to junior high, or if they have to move schools throughout the school year. We see that quite often. It's a similar type feeling, not an anxiety disorder, but definitely anxiety provoking for sure. And we can see and we can feel some of those effects in our body. So, I mean, similar, there's different study styles or study tactics or approaches to how we're navigating our learning journey. And then there's the psychological element, and this is some like the irrational thinking or the negative self-talk, or this could be even from the previous lived experience or the learned helplessness in situations. Perhaps in your previous learning journey, exams were not an area of success for you. And you're at a different place in your journey now, but you still have those feelings that are kind of associated with that assessment. I hear from students often, if they ever have to repeat an assessment, that they have an increase in exam anxiety before they go to do that assessment, because it's higher stakes, right? Like maybe it's their last chance before they can they can do that repeat assessment, but maybe that's their last opportunity before they have to redo the course. Okay. So definitely, even like the higher the stakes of the assessment, the more anxiety that it might give some people. So Same thing, we can prevent exam anxiety or even lessen the effects that we're feeling just on how we're operating throughout the year. So studying regularly, things we're going to talk about today, following a study schedule. For the psychological piece, it's really important that if we're experiencing barriers, we need to reach out for some support. And so accessing counseling services, talking to a trusted friend if you don't have access to counseling services. And then, looking for some anxiety reduction techniques if that's something that you're experiencing. We want you to feel comfortable and good. So we have to sometimes take control of that for ourselves. Okay. So throughout all of these sessions, we've been talking about stuff. We started talking about stuff you had to do pre-term. So we started off talking about self-management and what you need to do to kind of be ready. Same thing for exams and completing assessments. So before the term even starts, before you register in the course or before the course contract date begins, you need to engage in that process of self-analysis, being very real with yourself. Get the logistical stuff out of the way. Create that study space so that you're not having to work on it there. Having an organizational system, knowing the procedures, familiarizing yourself with the process for completing exams if there is a process. So if you have to have it proctored or whatever that might be, make sure you figure all of that out beforehand. And then the other one is arrange for accommodations. The wait of need can be so long. So we need to do that proactively, okay? Institutions always want to serve the students. We want to make sure that they're super supported, but you have to be really proactive in getting that all sorted out. So part of the engagement in the self-analysis is really knowing how you learn. Sometimes you're not going to know that right off the bat. You're actually often not going to know that. And throughout your journey, you're going to learn more about yourself as a learner. Before we started the session, I was mentioning that, really throughout your undergrad, the whole time is just a journey to kind of figure out how to learn, and you really have mastered it when you're done your degree, right? So just kind of, being real with yourself. And that's why engaging in the reflection as you progress throughout your journey of learning is really important. Okay. I'm going to move through quite quickly on this just because we have lots to cover. So please, someone stop me if you have a question. So we're going to talk about a framework. Now, in the literature, you will read about study cycles. And you could Google study cycle and they come up everywhere. There's different versions of it. There's different universities, different practitioners have all kind of developed their own little cycle. That's kind of what happens. I like to talk about a learning cycle instead of a study cycle. And this is where I'm thinking the approach is a little bit different than what you might have expected. So I don't know about all of you, but when I think of studying, or when I traditionally would think of studying, so through my undergrad and when I was in high school, I would think of studying as the process that you engage in right before an assessment. Maybe it's a week before if I didn't procrastinate. But most often it was like you would go to review classes and then, or in high school, you'd go to review classes and then you'd like read the textbook and try and hope you'd feel good. And then in university, it was just a mix of everything, right? Um, Studying isn't actually about the session itself. That's part of the process, but it's actually like the whole learning cycle. So it's not a task reserved for midterms and finals. It's a way of learning material. And we need to engage in an effective learning cycle that's going to allow for studying throughout the term. If we are learning, we are studying. Okay. If we're studying, we should be learning. So I like to use this cycle as a framework for how we learn and how we demonstrate our learning over just specific strategy selection and use. And we'll talk about some strategies for today, for sure. I think that's really important, but just knowing that we're thinking of like a whole cycle. So if we look at this slide right here, at the very top, we have preview, and that's the first one we're going to talk about. So, and then we're going to move to engage, engagement, and then review, and then self-check, assess, and then back to that reflection piece. And so that's how I have the presentation kind of laid out today for everybody. So let's talk about the preview, okay? So in this stage, it's the information that we're gathering in the preview stage is going to guide our approach or our strategy to learn within the course. So the first thing what we need to do is we need to preview the course outline, the syllabus, the website, etc., for the main ideas and the topics that are covered within the course. this information is going to help us create our own personal strategy, okay? We're gathering information, we're previewing to determine how we're going to approach learning, which is studying for the course. So the way that we learn is important. The way we're expected to demonstrate the learning is also important. Both pieces of information are going to guide how we approach what we often call studying, which I would argue is learning, okay? We study the material we're learning in order to demonstrate our learning. So to do that, the first thing that like I said, we need to do is examine the required course assessments. Typically, this is assignments and exams. It could include projects. So you need to consider the type of the assignment. Is it a project? Is it an essay? Is it a discussion forum? And then we need to consider the format of the exam if the course contains exams. So is it multiple choice? Is it true, false, long, short answer, closed book, open book, take home? The format's really important to determine our strategy for learning and studying and demonstrating our learning of the material. All right. So once we figured that and extracted that information, and I'll show you in a second with that, we need to preview the required readings and material. And we can do that through a process of skimming for information, looking at some text features, some headings, we'll get into that more, and then planning and organizing our time, okay? Which is going to connect back to some things that we've already talked about. All right. So this is the slide I added in because I was working with a student today and I was like, I should add this in. I never thought to add this into the presentation. This is an example of a term at a glance that a student that I'm working with is using in their course. And so this is a document that we talked about this before with organization. At the beginning of the term, you go through, you outline everything that you have to do in that course so you can use it to help keep you on track and to prioritize time and to make sure you don't miss things. A whole bunch of strategies are interplay here. So on this first one for this victims of crime course, some things are crossed off because that's what the students already worked on. But you'll notice in this course that they have an assignment 1 worth 30%. And then you'll notice that they also have assignment 2 worth 30%. And then they have a final exam worth 40%. Okay. So that information is going to be really helpful because we know that there's going to be 2 assignments and an exam. We also have noted underneath the format of the exam, which is 70 multiple choice and true false questions. So the types of strategies that we're going to use to learn, that I as a learner am going to use to learn this material is going to be determined based on the content that I'm going to be previewing and learning, as well as the type of assessment. The information that I'm learning, I'm going to probably have to demonstrate in the assignment. And most definitely, I'm going to have to demonstrate in that final exam. But how I study for a final exam with multiple choice questions versus a final exam that's just an essay, not just, but that's an essay or a short answer questions it's going to be a little bit different because it's going to test us differently. We'll talk about this in a minute. The other example here is a table of a different course. This is an Aboriginal Justice in Canada course. In this one, you'll notice that there's no exams. There are 4 assignments. So the way that I'm going to learn this material and study the material is going to be different than how I would for an exam. In essence, one of the strategies, depending upon your goals for this course, could be to learn the material to complete the assignment, rather than rote memorization or being able to quickly retrieve concepts, right? So the type of studying is going to be different. The way I'm going to learn and interact and engage with that material is also different. Is this sounding okay to everybody so far? Are you with me? Feel free to give me a thumbs up or like a thumbs up in the chat or something. Okay, perfect, cool. One person's with me. Just kidding. Okay. So we've extracted information, we've previewed, and now we're going to consider this exam format. You're going to study differently based on the format of the exam. And the format is going to often, not always, determine the type of depth of content the assessment is assessing, okay? So essay long answer. Typically, not always, typically, they're looking for application of theories or big concepts or ideas. You really have to apply it. It's a great opportunity to apply the information. To do this, to study, one of the ways that would naturally come to me, or one of the strategies you could choose, would be to create an outline or to map out concepts visually. Okay, we're not necessarily looking for direct recall, but you want to map it out visually. Another way could be to answer some practice questions, or to engage in the practice questions that were perhaps offered in the study guide or even in the textbook, or, which we'll get into next week, you can use the headings of some of the material to come up with your own type of question. So kind of predicting in that way. If you're doing an open book and or a take-home exam, again, the way that you prepare for that is going to be a little bit different. The way that you learn the content might be a little bit different. Again, they're looking for application of theories, big concepts, and ideas, typically in a well-designed assessment. So one of the ways that you can tackle that, oftentimes, I have to say, students always tell me, oh, it's an open book exam, it's no big deal. Well, it is a big deal, because if it's designed appropriately, then it's not, in theory, going to be something you can just like Google the answer. You still have to know the content. The difference is you could know the content in a way where you can, the way that you're learning the material, you could create kind of a reference, use the content as like a reference material. So this is where, you're highlighting and flagging study notes, or maybe the textbook, maybe you're highlighting and flagging information. So you would have already had to interact with the material, but you should be able to use that as a reference to kind of trigger some memory if that's the way that the exam is designed. So we're focusing on creating a resource to reference. The act of creating the resource is active studying. So this is, again, where we're going to mark and highlight and color code and do all of that fun stuff, depending upon how we learn and what our preference is for learning. Another way is to make some lists and important facts. We're going to talk about it in a little bit today, about some concept pages. So that's one of the ways that we would tackle this type of assessment. Multiple choice, more of a traditional. We see this oftentimes in first and second year courses where there's a large amount of students taking it. They're looking for more recall of information. So again, the way that you're going to plan it, the way that you're going to prepare for it is going to be a little bit different. For this, students often use cue cards or split page notes to study vocab and terms where you have to recall the information as opposed to regurgitate it in written form. Some ways to tackle this could be to look at some text features, which we'll talk about next week with reading strategies, and then to complete again some review practice questions if that's available. Okay, so the exam format is really important for sure. Now, we're going to go into this in way more depth next week, but one of the preview things is to look at the required readings. So you want to get an overview of the course here. It's going to help you determine how to take your notes, how to extract the essential information. So these strategies are going to be really important, just so you're planning out your term, so you know how you're going to tackle the information. And I want to say, you don't have to have a really clear plan from the beginning, but you definitely have to have a direction, I would think, to help guide you through that course. And that plan can change, and it should change. It should be a living plan that keeps changing as you're working through the material, but you should have kind of a sense of direction of how you're going to tackle it. So that leads us into making a plan for organizing our time. If we know that a course has 4 written papers and we've looked through the assignment criteria and they're really large and they're going to take a lot of time, and we know that writing may not be our strength, even though that course does not have an exam, we need to plan our time. And so having that information about what's required, knowing our strengths and weaknesses as a learner, we can start planning what supports and resources we are going to need throughout that term so we can be successful. Some of the time management ways that we talked about before, with creating the term at a glance, then your week at a glance, planning your days, the time blocking, all of that comes into play right now and it applies. So that's that piece. So speaking of time management, there is something I want to show you today. So with time management, same kind of thing, that organizational system. We want to start early, we want to chunk our studying, and we want to schedule in breaks. So right now we're going to talk about the chunking your studying and scheduling in your breaks. I'm hoping a lot of you, if not all of you, have heard of the Pomodoro technique. It's very, very, very common. The Pomodoro technique, it's a super simple method to help you get your tasks done. Students use this all the time for academic tasks. You can use this for not academic tasks. I use this for my professional work sometimes. If I'm writing something, this can be really helpful. It's named after a Pomodoro timer, like the kitchen timer. So a tomato in essence. And it involves considering in advance how many Pomodoros you might need for what you want to get done. You set your timer and then you kind of go from that. So in this technique, you're going to choose one single task that you are going to focus on and write down. The task is not going to be to complete the essay. The task might be to read a research article, or the task might be to, I don't know, write your topic sentences for your body and start brainstorming. Like that could be your task if you're writing a paper. So you're going to choose one single task and you're to focus on, and you're going to write that down on a piece of paper. You're going to set a timer for 25 minutes. You're going to not use your cell phone, preferably. If you need to use your cell phone, you're going to turn your cell phone over and you're going to put it out of reach. You're going to have the timer set. It's going to be across the room. You're going to have all distractions removed. This is part of your securing your study space. You are going to work on that task until the timer rings. Okay. It's kind of like when you go to the gym and you're going to go on the treadmill and you see the timer for 25 minutes. You're like, I'm going to go over 25 minutes. And you're like, oh my gosh, I've only gone for 4 minutes. I'm exhausted. But you force yourself, right? You're like, oh, 5 more, 5 more. That's kind of what you're doing with the Pomodoro. You're going to keep focused on that task and you're going to work. When that timer goes, you're not looking at anything else. You're not checking email. You're not on eBay. You're just focusing on that task. When the timer goes, if you have a tracker, which I'll show you in a minute, you're going to check that off and you're going to set your timer again for 5 minutes and you're going to take a short break. I encourage you to get up from your spot, grab a glass of water. Do not look at your cell phone. Do not turn on the TV. Do not start playing with your dog. Get up, take a quick little walk around, do what you need to do. And then you're going to come back and you're going to set your timer again for 25 minutes for another Pomodoro. Okay. And you're going to focus on your task again. There are tons of Pomodoro trackers available. There's ones you can get off of Pinterest or Google or wherever, and you can print them off. You can make it yourself, or you can just put a little. I like to put on a sticky note. You could write like I have a sticky note here. You could write 25, 25, 25, and after 25 minutes, you could just exit off. Okay, so you could do that. Renee said if you buy the tomato on Amazon, it ticks. Oh, okay, don't buy the tomato on Amazon because that ticking would drive me nuts unless it would bring you joy, then do it. But yeah, so there's different ways of kind of tracking. It's not perfect, but you can definitely tailor it to work for you. Okay. Please do not let having the fancy tool procrastinate you further. I hear this all the time. I spent so much time making the perfect Pomodoro tracker. Now I don't have time. Now I'm behind or blah, blah, blah. You don't have time for that. If you're already in your term, you don't have time for that. Just get a sticky note, put 25, 25, 25, 25, however many sessions you want to do. Once it's gone off, exit it off. Do what you need to do. Okay. Do not waste your time making it pretty. We don't have time for that. You can do that in between terms. Okay. This is what I do. So I embed, this was the last week I was like, oh, I can't wait to tell you about my own little version on the Pomodoro. So I embed the Pomodoro into my scheduling. So this is a sample calendar. It's a little small on my screen. I hope you can all see it. I will plan out my day. This is part of my daily planning into Pomodoros if I need to focus. My ultimate focus times are late in the evening or early in the morning. That is not always reasonable for me to get my work done. It's not always reasonable if you have a life and busy stuff and things are going on. You can't always pick the optimum time. If you can pick your optimum time of focus, then do it. If you can't, what are you going to do? You're going to replicate. You're going to create the artificial structure that you need to be successful. So what I do is I schedule tasks into my calendar using the Pomodoro. So you'll see here from 9 in the morning, I have biology chapter 3 concept page. So from 9 to 9:25, I'm going to set my timer and I'm going to work on that. Okay. I'm not looking at emails. I'm not getting distracted with other things. I'm solely focusing on that. Once my timer goes off, I'm giving myself permission to stop that task. Maybe I have it planned that I have a couple Pomodoro times to work on that. That's awesome. Maybe I don't. Maybe as an expert learner, I'm making that decision when that Pomodoro goes off that I'm in a great area of focus. I'm definitely zoned in and I'm able to continue working on that task and I need to. I may make the decision to continue to do that. It's your call. It's your schooling, right? You know yourself best. So you're going to take your 5-minute break, grab your water. I always say water because we never drink enough water. You're going to stand up, you're going to move, you're not going to look at your cell phone, or I'm not going to look at my cell phone. And then you're going to come back and you're going to do it again. And so you can track that in your calendar like that. I do this all the time. If I have to work on something that's going to require my sustained focus, I am using the Pomodoro strategy. To me, it comes so second nature that I don't even have to track anymore. But if I did, if that was something I noticed slipping and I needed that tracking as a scaffold, because that's really all it is, then I'm going to incorporate that, okay, into my practice again. And so my day is organized by Pomodoros, and that works for my neurodiverse brain. And that's definitely a strategy that's been really helpful for me. Okay. The next one is to engage. Engage, if you look at like a typical kind of study cycle that you find, oftentimes this will be like, what will it say? It'll be like go to class or like participate or something like that. I like to focus on engage because we're not always learning by going to a traditional classroom setting, especially at AU. And so that's fine. You just need to engage. You need to engage in the lectures. You need to engage in the videos, the readings, the seminars, the discussion forums. You need to engage in the course. This is typically, like I said, when you go to class for 3 hours a week for one course and you're learning the material. If you are in a distance course, an online course, and it's perhaps self-paced, this is when you are doing those chapter readings and you're engaging in the learning activities that are designed for you to learn the material. This is still studying, okay? So when you're engaging, we're going to utilize these effective note-taking systems that we've already learned about and that we've previewed our course and decided what we're going to try and use. This is where, if needed, we're going to do something like record the lectures, if that's something that'll be helpful for us, if there's a lecture component. This is where we're going to highlight, and we're going to highlight the concepts. I'm not meaning use a highlighter necessarily, it could be, but this is where we're going to highlight the important things. We're going to zone in on the important information that's going to be shared with us. This is where we're going to ask some questions. And most importantly, this is where we're going to synthesize the learning material. And to do all of that, we have to be present. We have to find a way to be present in the moment. I'm working with a student that works a full-time job online while attending live lectures online. And I'm like, how are you present for that? When we're in a virtual environment, we are really good sometimes at multitasking, and it just doesn't always work because we need to be present to engage in the material. So let's bring it back to session 1 on self-management, self-efficacy, self-analysis, goal setting. What note-taking system will work best for us? Let's be real with ourselves. There is no point taking notes if they're going to be ineffective, if they're not going to help your studying, if they're not going to help you learn and engage with the material. So choose something that's going to help you with that. These notes are going to help us focus in the moment, extract essential information, but they can also, if they're done well, they can serve as a resource for us when we go to the next stage, the reviewing stage, which we'll talk about in a minute, which is typically what we think of when we talk about studying. All right, recording lectures. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this because it doesn't apply to us a lot at AU. If you need to record lectures, if you're an in-person class, please do so. But I want to caution, it's a good way to review presented material after class. And for some learners, they really do need it for a variety of reasons, but it can be very time consuming. And it is not a replacement to obtaining the presented information during the lectures. If you're going to a lecture and you're recording, but you're not paying attention, why are you bother going? You really want to make sure that you're going to be super present. So there's a link there. There's just a link to some ways to record lectures, some common ways in post-secondary right now, some common technologies. Okay. Back to highlighting the concepts and topic. Typically, we're doing this through our note system, whatever that's looking like for you, while you're engaging in the lecture or the reading. Okay. A textbook, I'm going to talk about this next week so much. A textbook is not a novel. We are not reading it like a novel. Who wants to read that in for enjoyment? I do not want to read it for enjoyment. Though it could be interesting, I would rather a novel. Okay. So you're using that as a resource. You're using that as a tool to learn, to access the information. From there, we need to create some study notes and some concept pages. Okay. Part of that engagement really is an opportunity for us to ask questions. The information is there. We need to get creative and we need to find the answer. When we're in a virtual environment and we don't have that live interaction, it can be really easy for us to just to not ask those bigger questions. Also, we're not hearing our peers ask those questions, which you can really learn from. So use your instructor. That's what they're paid for. Attend their office hours, send an email, make an appointment. The course tutors and your instructors are there. They're there for you, and that's what their job is. Use your peers. I know you're not sitting next to them in class necessarily, but you can post on the course forums and have some interaction that way. You can create some study groups. I see on social media that AU has lots of kind of separate little program area groups where students are connecting. So find that connection if you need that connection. And then find resources. There's really no excuse for not finding the answer. We live in a realm of information. So just kind of go beyond and try and find that information to ask those bigger questions for sure. So synthesize your learning. This is probably the number one thing. When we're synthesizing our learning, we're combining information to create something new. So we're taking what we know and we're putting it together with the new knowledge that we've just gained from the reading, from the lecture, from the discussion forum, from the conversation. We're putting previous and new learning together in our head, kind of like a puzzle. This is, in a nutshell, synthesizing our learning. And so there's some ways that we can do that. The steps that I always talk about are thinking critically about the content. So that's the engagement and the reflection and the interaction. Organizing our sources. So we've engaged already. Now we've got to organize that in a format that's going to work for our brain. So this could be our notes. This could be creating an outline, creating a concept page, making it visual, and then creating the context and connection with the material. So maybe we're doing that by answering questions, talking out loud, explaining it to someone else, relating it to previously learned material, some way for us to learn that information. And then we want to be present. So to do that, same thing, create the environment we need, replicate, create our structure, do what we need to do in order to be present for that to occur. I'm going to motor through everyone because there's so much. Okay, so review. This is typically what we're thinking about when we think of studying, okay? But I always say we need to review as you learn them. As you learn the material, the concepts, okay? So of course we do. We talk about this forever. Your teachers for years have been telling you, but it's true. It's also really hard to do because life is busy and courses move fast. And it's just like you get really overwhelmed. I can tell you what to do and that you should do it. I will also recognize that it is difficult to review as you go. But if you can prioritize it and make it happen, it's really, really helpful to the learning process, okay? So to do that, you can read some notes and materials. I'm not going to read them all off this slide because we're going to talk about them in more depth. And so let's do it. So reading, again, we're going to talk about this next week. We've already briefly touched on it, but you need to read not in isolation. Reading in isolation is not studying. Reading that textbook is not studying. You're just reading the textbook. You need to read the notes and material to fill in the gaps, to form questions, to interact. Do not reread the textbook. Once you've taken your notes and you're trusting your process that you've refined for yourself, put your textbook away. Your textbook is now a resource. It is the curriculum. You've extracted the curriculum, the content from it. That textbook is now a resource. It's a tool, not a novel. Okay, that's the number one thing I can say. When my son did it for his social studies exam today. Last night he was studying and he had his textbook. And I'm like, what are you doing? Like, that's not studying, kiddo. Let me show you. Let's take it out. It didn't go over very well, just for the record. But so we're getting the information. This is also where we need to clarify. There's no point taking notes that don't make sense to us. So again, engaging with that material, summarizing information, it's tricky, and we'll talk about it next week, but it is hard. It's a skill that we need to learn. It's really hard. It can be difficult. But while you're doing that, you need to engage in clarification. Don't write down a vocabulary word you don't understand. Let's find another one that will help you understand the concept, okay? Clarify with your instructor, your peers, with yourself, different resources. Do all of that stuff to make sure that you're understanding what you're writing down. Then we need to synthesize, organize, and connect the information together. This, again, is that studying process. So we need to create one ways to do that is to create associations between unrelated items. Um, for example, when I was principal, students would always say my name wrong. And so I would say, well, think of it like psychedelic fidelic. And they always seem to remember it that way. So just finding some sort of connection to something to create meaning helps with memory. We do this all the time with people's names. Using visual cues, graphs and photos is a great way to make that connection for yourself. Mnemonics, I don't use it often too much for myself. It's not how my brain works, but for a lot of people, it does. So that's using like rhymes or acronyms or even like the acrostic poem kind of thing to recall information. It can be really helpful for a lot of people's brains. So don't sell that short, okay? If that's going to work for you, then please do that. And really just that extracting that writing information down and engaging with it at a critical level. Well, Deanna, how do I do that? Let me tell you. This is where the study strategies come in, okay? So there's many types of strategies to choose from. Just like everything else, specifically with note taking, there isn't one superior strategy. There isn't a perfect strategy. There's horrible strategies because if they're not working for you, it's a horrible strategy. So strong learners create their own strategies that evolve over time as they develop as learners. It looks different for everyone. So if you ask somebody about their study strategies, I bet you they're not often going to be able to say, oh yeah, this is what it's called, right? Same with note taking. Oh, I use this method. It doesn't have to be a method. The key for study strategies is to choose a strategy based on your learning style and preferences. That's important, and the format and the type of assessment like we talked about earlier. So the key with that is to engage that metacognitive process in your brain. You need to be thinking about your thinking about your learning, okay? Um, all of the resources to do this are here. We've got everything on the internet. We've got everything, like we can find different strategies for studying, but it's not going to tell us necessarily which is the best one for us. Okay, so we don't need someone to lecture at us and tell us exactly what strategy to use when studying. We need to go on that journey as we're learning to discover what's going to work for us. We can get ideas from other people. We can get ideas and we can try them out and we can modify and adapt that strategy to work for us. So I like to think of it of sorting information into two categories. There are more than two categories, 100%. So this is not science here, but I like to think of it this way. It helps me to think of facts that I need to memorize and concepts that I need to understand. I know. In order to memorize something, you should be able to understand it. I agree 100%. But in my brain, if I'm thinking about like where to start, and when I'm working with students, I'm always like, let's look at the content. Students often say, but I don't know where to start. I don't know what strategy. Well, is it asking for you to memorize information? If that's the case, maybe you want to do a flashcard strategy, which I'll show you in a minute. Maybe that's when you're going to do some activities that are going to look for some recall or do some vocabulary stuff, okay? If it's concepts that you have to understand, this is like bigger concepts. So this is where you want to map stuff out. This is where you want to create diagrams and timelines and concept maps, because those are typically the questions on an assessment that are going to require you to elaborate on. Okay. So let's talk about flashcards really quick because I know we're getting really short on time. This is like a number one strategy I use all the time. And I coach students to do this all the time. So flashcards are really just these cue cards you can get at the dollar store. If you don't have access to it, just cut a piece of paper into like the small thing, the small size. I really like them because they're portable. You can carry them around. Flashcards are really good for use for testing and improving your memory. Okay, so quizzing yourself. Typically, they're two-sided. You have a prompt on one side. So for this one, I have the word personality. And then on the other side, you have the information that you want to quiz yourself on. So when I'm creating this flashcard, the creation itself is super beneficial. Create your own cards. Do not purchase them. Do not get them off someone else. Create them. The creation of the tool is so important in studying, and I argue for all of it. Okay, so create them yourself, the act of creating, because you're going to put the vocab word, and then on the back, you're going to put the definition in your own words. Why in your own words? Because it has to have meaning to you. Okay, do not just copy and paste the word from the vocabulary, the definition from the textbook. It's not going to make meaning for you. It's not. If you really need to have that for like recall on an exam, I can get that. Have the verbatim definition from the textbook, but then have it in your own words underneath. Okay. When you are quizzing yourself and engaging in that act of studying, you might have a stack of these cards for the unit you're studying that you're going to be assessed on. You're going to read the word. So in this one, I've got personality, and you're going to say, okay, I'm just going to model it for you. I'm going to be like, personality. Okay, what's personality? Personality is a trait. Personality is something everybody has. And then I'm going to list off everything that I can think of that I might need to know about personality. I'm going to flip it over, and I'm going to be like, oh yeah, it's an individual's unique and consistent behavior trait. Okay, I got that. If I got it correct, I'm going to put it in another pile. If I didn't, and that's like my winning pile, like today's the day I won. I mastered this card, I'm putting it aside. If I didn't get it correct, it's going to go to the back of my pile. And I am going to go through all this whole stack that I have for this unit of these words, okay? These vocabulary words. It's really good for self-assessment. It's really good for spaced practice. So carry these in your purse. When I did my undergrad, I caught the LRT in Edmonton all the way to the university. I would keep these in my bag, and on the train, I would go through and I would quiz myself. Once you've mastered them, they can be out of the pile, and your pile eventually gets smaller. Okay, so this is a really good one that I do all the time. You can regroup them, you can mix them up, it's awesome. You can also use a flashcard for not just vocab words, but for theories or bigger concepts where you have to maybe list steps. So this one is the 5-factor model of personality traits that I just got out of a psych textbook, and there's 5 steps to it. So again, I can talk to myself and be like, what's the 5-factor model? What do I have to know about that again? Okay, there's this, there's this, there's this. And then I turn it around and I say if I was right. You can do that verbally, but if you know that your assessment is going to be a short answer or a long answer where you have to write stuff down, you could get a piece of paper and you could just scribble the answer so that you're getting it out on paper. All right. There's a whole bunch of apps and websites and stuff that kind of do this in a digital form if that's how your brain works. Quizlet is one I'm really familiar with, and a lot of the students that I support use that. Okay, I'm going to keep motoring through. I'm sorry, everybody. Concept page is my next favorite strategy. These are my top twos. The top 2 Deanna strategies. Okay, I'm just going to give a little caution here. When you create a concept page, I'm going to get you to envision it as a cheat sheet. It is not a cheat sheet. I'm not telling you to cheat. I do not believe that's okay. I don't condone that. Okay, but I'm gonna use the analogy of a cheat sheet because that really helps me explain it and helps me understand. I want you to imagine that you are able to go into a closed book exam and you are allowed to bring 1 sheet of paper. Okay. I want you to imagine that you can put any information on this sheet of paper that you need to know for that assessment. Make it visual. I want you to also imagine that you can have this on the ground of the assessment and you can glance at it, but at a glance, at a distance, you need to be able to recall the information on the sheet. It's making your learning visual. So what I tell students to do, if you're studying for a quiz or an exam or whatever, and you have all of your information in your notes that you've created from either the readings or the lecture or whatever, use those notes to highlight the most important concepts. Depending on the length of the exam and how much content, you might have like 4, 5, 6 sheets of paper. Then these sheets of paper become your study notes. This is the material you're carrying around with you when you have a quick 5-10 minutes. You're going to go through it. You're going to cover it up. You're going to quiz yourself. You're going to rewrite it. The act of creating it as a resource is fundamental to you understanding the information. Put some boxes, draw some diagrams, use some colors. And then when you're sitting in your exam, and then as you're mastering the information, you can eliminate the page, crumple it up, throw it away. You've mastered that information. And you know that through your self-assessment, which we'll talk about in a minute. Okay. So when you're in your exam, and there's something that's really tricky for you, just visualize it. Close your eyes and visualize where it was on that concept page, and that can help you retrieve the information. Okay. So when in doubt, create a cheat sheet. You're not actually going to cheat, but create that sheet that you in theory could have that you could reference and think. Okay. Concept pages are really good for open book exams too. So just a good way to kind of make it visual. All right. Which brings us to the next piece, which is the self-check or the self-assess. This is when you're checking your understanding. You need to be engaging this in the study process. You're not just rereading your material and not quizzing yourself. You have to quiz yourself. Group study situations are awesome for self-check. Or if you don't have access to that, replicate it. Give your notes to your spouse, give your notes to your kid, to your friend, have them quiz you. Play teacher, okay? Quiz yourself, explain the notes out loud, do all of that stuff. It's really, really helpful. Then it brings you to the actual assessment, the day of the exam. You need to complete it. That's the next step in the process, okay? There are many strategies that you can look at. I debated if I should go over all the test taking strategies, all the test wiseness strategies, but you can Google it if that's what you think you need and that's a barrier for you, or you can reach out to me, we can talk further. But there's a couple things that I really want to point out. I can tell you to get up early. I can tell you to have a good breakfast. I can tell you to get rest the night before, wear comfy clothes. We know that, okay? What I want to tell you is there's two things that I find really helpful when it comes to writing your assessment. The first one is the brain dump. The brain dump frees up space in your brain by dumping the contents on the paper right when you get into the exam. I did this all the time, specifically with French when I had to take French my first year of university. Imagine the concept page, imagine the cheat sheet that you're not actually cheating with. And whatever's on that concept page, when you whittled it down to one page, when you get into the exam, like this is what you're looking at outside the room. This is what you're bringing with you the day of. The only thing I would argue of study resource that you're bringing the day of would be this one concept page with the remaining concepts that are the most difficult for you to learn or to regurgitate. Okay, so I would argue that you could review this right before, right when you get into the exam. As soon as you get your assessment, flip it over and write everything down. Brain dump. Get everything you need to. Okay, this is a really effective strategy. It also requires some practice. So definitely when you're at home studying, imagine like what you're going to want to brain dump on the exam and practice doing that brain dump at home. Really, really, really effective strategy. Can also help a lot with test anxiety for sure. Okay. The other one is that visualization piece of the concept page. Whatever you need to learn the material, make your concept page. Imagine it's a poster on your wall. Where was the information? It's much like when we're at work and you got to tell someone at home where something is and they call you and you're like, oh crap, where did I leave the car keys? And you're closing your eyes and you're thinking, oh yeah, they're over there. Same type of strategy that you're going to engage in there. Okay. I feel so bad rushing through this. I'm so sorry. Other things, you can Google this, but scan the exam, familiarize yourself with the layout, know where the questions are going to be, know the type of questions right when you get into the exam before you start writing. I always say scan the exam, read the section headings. As you're reading the exam questions, read them carefully, write on the exam if it's a paper exam. If you don't have a paper exam and it's an online exam, see if you can get some scrap paper. Engage in those questions by writing as well. That's really helpful. Okay, cross out incorrect questions, draw diagrams, do whatever you need to make the meaning and connection. Keeping track of time. Sometimes we can rush because we're worried we're going to run out of time. If that's something that you battle, if that's a barrier for you, own it. Come up with a strategy so you can keep track of time. I have some students where I encourage them to divide the time, do the math when you get there, make a note on your book where you should be. It's really up to you. So just know yourself as a learner, okay? All right. The last piece here is reflect. This is where you're going to reflect back on your experience. Again, at the end of the term, after each assessment, what do I need to adjust in my practice? What resources do I need to enable my success? If I'm not doing so well in that first midterm in math, in physics, whatever it means, I always go to math because math's the devil for me. But if I'm not doing good on that subject matter, what do I need to do to help myself do better? Do I need to access a strategist or a tutor? Or do I need to engage with a study buddy? What do I need to change in my practice? And make sure you're being honest with yourself because it's important. It's really important. And then bring this back in. What are your goals? What are your goals as a learner? What are you going to do to build in your goals? And we're out of time and I want to ask questions, so I'm not going to go over this. But if you ever want some support building your goals, you can always reach out and I'll always connect with you, okay? And just, yeah, reflect. So your takeaway, again, is just to reflect on your practice. That's the big thing here, is being really reflective in it. So how's that for a rush at the end, everyone? I hope someone has a question for me or a comment, because I totally just spoke at all of you. Oh, well, thanks, Selena. Again, this is not information that I usually present to people. This is what I'm working with them on coaching, right? And so I definitely encourage you to kind of think through that lens. It's all about being reflective in our practice and knowing ourselves as a learner, what's going to help us to be most successful. Because you know you. People can give you tips and tricks, but you know you as a learner. No one is going to know you as well as you do.
Do you find as a learning strategist that when people come to meet with you, they kind of want you to figure them out and then come up with a strategy, or do you help them to draw what kind of things will assist them?
Totally. So usually when students reach out to me, it's because they've already experienced a point of struggle. I'm usually like a reactionary support, which is okay. That's how we get support, right? If that's with a lot of things. Yeah, oftentimes students are like, can you just tell me how to learn? And I'm like, I can, yeah, but let's learn about you first. And so we kind of go through, and I don't just like meet with a student and be like, okay, boom, here's your prescription of strategies. It doesn't work like that. We look at what they're currently doing and we make some small tweaks in order to help them kind of develop as a learner. And so that's kind of how we approach it. But yeah, a lot of students are just like, okay, well, tell me what to do. And I'm like, okay, well, I can't tell you what to do, but we can start by me giving you some tips on how to refine what you're doing to meet how you are as a learner. And like Renee just said, she doesn't know who she is as a learner. You're not expected to know Renee. It's not like you can't just take an online quiz necessarily, right? You have to kind of just see what's going to work and what's not going to work and what feels comfortable for you. Much like exercise, not everybody's a runner. Not everybody likes to cross country ski. Those are two things I like doing. But it doesn't mean that you can't do it. It just means that you need different scaffolds to do it. Or maybe it means that you go swimming instead. Or maybe you get a Peloton bike. I don't know. Like you just have to find something else in order to move your body. It's the same thing with your brain. We can all learn. We're all capable of learning, but we're all going to need different things in order to access that learning. Fortunately, the way that learning is presented to us is not always accessible for us. And so that's really important to kind of consider as well. Oh, Selena, I'm glad. Selena said she found it reassuring that some of the techniques she uses were suggested. That's good. Awesome. Yeah. You know what? I always say keep it simple. I have my little box here of like stickies and like, what are these called? Cue cards, index cards, these little post-it stuff. There's always like something you can use that's fancy. It's sat in that box for years. And like, I mean, I'm not in school, but I'm using it to model with students. It doesn't have to be fancy. Use what you have. And what you're using might change from course to course because the course content's going to change and you as a learner is going to grow as well. The other thing that's really important, I cannot stress enough, the way you learn and the way you access and the resources you need to access your education is going to change depending upon what's going on in your life. If you've got personal life stressors happening, like, I don't know, a pandemic, or if you've got like your attention is drawn to different directions, you're going to need different things to learn, different strategies and skills in order to learn and to access your learning and to demonstrate your learning. So just being really mindful of that too and trying not to beat ourselves up over it. We can only try what we can try. And if it's not working, we're just going to try something else and we're just going to reach out. I think I mentioned in previous sessions, like a lot in my first year of undergrad studies, I had no idea what I was doing. I didn't know you could meet with a strategist. I don't know if they were around that. I don't know, but I didn't have that as a resource. I did have my friend Jenny that I met in French 101. And I did sit with Jenny in the cafeteria at Concordia University in Edmonton. And I saw what she did and I just tried what she was doing, and we studied together and we talked about it, and that was fundamental to me progressing in post-secondary. And eventually you just kind of pushed your way through and figured stuff out. Yeah, Mallory, I'm glad it was helpful for sure. So I hope everybody could kind of steal one thing. And, I'll say one more thing. I wasn't always an A student. Like in my first, I mean, I did good in university, but I worked really hard, and I was not an A student or a B student in high school. I worked really hard, and I had not, I mean, everybody works hard. We do the best that we can do, but I was the student that had to earn every single grade. And so you had to just get creative, right? When something's hard for you, you have to get more creative in finding new ways to navigate those waters. So the resources are there and the tools are there. We just have to keep trying, for sure. Yeah. So that's all I have, Carrie.
That's awesome. Well, I really love how you scaffold this, and we started where we did and we ended up here. So now we can go back and say, okay, well, I need to review my note-taking skills. I need to review my organization skills, right? So that I can get ready for the tests. So that's really awesome. Like, once again, fabulous session. Yeah.
Of course, I do want to say, like, if I were to redo this series again, this would be the last session, because there's things we're going to talk about in the reading strategies and the writing strategies that are going to be really helpful for this as well, right? Like, this is kind of the end. So I apologize. When I was thinking and mapping it out, I didn't make that connection for myself. This is part of the learning journey, right? And so there's definitely going to be some reading strategies that are going to help you utilize some of the strategies that we talked about, because the skills build on each other, right? It's not just a clear timeline. Timeline is not going to be the method of visual that I'm going to use to map out how we learn. It's not going to be a timeline. It's going to be more of like a concept map where we go in all different directions, for sure.
Yeah, you bet. I'm going to stop the recording, but I want to thank you, Deanna. I want to thank all of you for being with us tonight, and we'll take any more questions as well if you have once we stop the recording. And I've also posted in the chat the YouTube channel that I created to quickly put up the other sessions so that you can link back and take a look at it. And the YouTube channel belongs to accessibilityservices.au@gmail.com. But I'm sure if you just search accessibility services or go to that link in the chat, then you'll be able to get to the recordings. For now, that's where they'll be held. Thanks.
Perfect. Yes, awesome.